They told you freedom would come in your 60s. That if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and followed the rules, one day, someday, you'd finally be free. Retirement was the reward, the finish line. But now you're here, and no one told you what to do with the silence. No alarms, no deadlines, no one needing you. And suddenly, it hits you. You were trained to work, not to live. And now that the job is over, you don't know who you are without it. They never taught you how to be still, only how to strive. From the first bell of school to the last day in the office, your life was built around one idea: earn your place, earn respect, earn income, earn rest. You were handed a map, not of life but of labor. Graduate, work, save, retire. A straight path with no room for detours, no space for stillness. Just the promise that if you followed the line long enough, something called freedom would be waiting at the end. And so you did what was asked. You woke up early, stayed late, sacrificed weekends, provided. You became dependable, efficient, respected, a model citizen of the system. And for a while that felt like enough. But now, something's changed. The meetings have stopped. The emails have gone quiet. The calendar is no longer your master. And instead of feeling free, you feel unmoored, unseen. No one told you how heavy silence can be when you've spent a lifetime being needed. You thought you were walking toward liberation, but it feels more like a soft dismissal, a polite exit from the machine you spent decades keeping alive. And somewhere deep beneath the routines and the accolades, a question begins to form. Who am I now? This isn't just about retirement. It's about identity. Because when your worth has been measured by what you do, what's left when you stop doing? Alan Watts once said, "You are under no obligation to be the person you were told to be." But what happens when that's exactly who you became? When your name, your time, yourself were all shaped to fit a role. No one prepared you for this unraveling. Not the career books, not the financial plans. They told you how to retire from a job. They never told you how to retire from a role, from an identity, from the belief that your value was tied to usefulness. And so you arrive at this moment, full of time, empty of direction, and maybe quietly, full of regret. Regret for the years spent postponing joy, for the friendships neglected in the name of ambition, for the books you never read, the music you never danced to, the sunsets you never watched in silence, because you were always too busy. But busy doing what? Surviving? Maintaining an identity someone else assigned to you? Because the hardest truth is this: you weren't just working a job. You were performing a self. And now that the performance has ended, there's no script left to follow. But not all is lost, because this isn't the end of the path. It's the edge of the map. And here, finally, is where real life begins, not with more tasks, but with deeper questions. Not with a plan, but with presence. And if you're willing to listen, you may hear a voice you haven't heard in years. Your own. There's a strange emptiness that follows the end of long devotion. Not the loud kind. Not grief that wails or loss that announces itself, but a quiet, lingering ache that lives in the spaces where meaning used to be. You don't talk about it much, because from the outside you're doing well. You've made it. You're safe, secure. You should be enjoying yourself. But deep down, something feels hollow. And that hollowness has a shape, one you've seen before but never had the words to describe. It's the shape of a life that's been defined entirely by function. For decades, your value was measured in output, in goals reached, tasks completed, problems solved. You were a teacher, a manager, a technician, an organizer. Whatever the label, it came with structure, identity, and a deep, if subtle, sense of matching. But now that the label is gone, so is the scaffolding that held yourself together. What remains is not just an identity crisis, it's an existential vacuum. Because in truth, most people weren't prepared for freedom. They were prepared to function inside a machine. And machines don't teach you how to feel. They teach you how to perform. So you wake up into this so-called freedom, and it feels more like a suspension. The urgency is gone, but so is the affirmation. You no longer hear the words that once anchored your worth. We need you. And this is where the real confusion begins. Because it's not that you miss the job, you miss the feeling of being part of something. There's no ceremony for this loss, no language for it. You are simply expected to adjust, to trade identity for leisure and find joy in the vacancy. But joy doesn't bloom in a vacuum. It needs roots, meaning, presence. And when your presence was never practiced, when you were always looking forward, always producing, the stillness feels almost violent. It exposes everything you postponed, the emotions you filed away, the longings you silenced in the name of responsibility. This is the part most people never speak of, that what we call retirement is often the beginning of a subtle erasure, not of your achievements, but of your reflected self. You begin to ask questions no one taught you how to face. Who am I without the title? Who am I when there's no task to perform? What does a day mean when nothing is demanded of me? These questions hurt not because they're abstract, but because they're deeply personal. They peel back everything you thought made you whole. And yet, within that discomfort, there's a door, not a final one, a beginning. Because if you are no longer a role, then maybe, just maybe, you're finally free to be something else, or someone true. What if the life you've been living wasn't really yours? That question doesn't come suddenly. It arrives slowly, like light leaking through a crack in a wall you didn't know existed. First, it's just a discomfort, a sense that something about the way you've lived doesn't quite fit anymore. But then it deepens, and you start to realize most of your choices weren't really choices. They were reactions to expectations, to survival, to roles that were handed to you before you could even speak. You weren't taught to author your life. You were taught to comply with a template. The education system taught you obedience. The workplace rewarded repetition. And the retirement model offered rest, but only after usefulness had expired. You were never invited to ask the deeper questions. What do I truly want? What lights me up? What do I believe in beyond what I've been told to believe? These weren't part of the curriculum, because systems don't thrive on self-inquiry. They thrive on structure, on conformity, on predictability. And so, slowly, life became a series of scheduled performances. You showed up, you executed, you delivered, you smiled when expected, you buried the questions, you adapted, you endured. And over time, your being became a doing, yourself a function. But underneath it all, beneath the emails, the meetings, the achievements, something quieter was happening. A self was waiting, not the self assigned to you by job titles or roles, but the one that existed before the scripts began. The one that asked big questions before they were trained to sound foolish. The one that used to feel wonder, awe, possibility, long before the calendar took over your days. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once warned that the greatest danger is losing oneself and not even realizing it. And that's precisely what modern life is designed to do. It doesn't steal your soul all at once. It distracts you from it little by little, until you forget it was ever yours to begin with. And then comes retirement. The distraction ends. The mask is no longer needed, and you're left standing in front of a mirror, not recognizing the face staring back. This is the moment of rupture, the silent awakening, and it can feel terrifying, because if the life you've been living wasn't truly yours, then who are you now? This is not a breakdown, it's a threshold. And on the other side isn't collapse, it's clarity. Because once you see the machine, you can stop feeding it. Once you name the script, you can begin to write your own. It won't be clean. It won't be fast. It won't always be comfortable. But it will be yours. And in that quiet rebellion, even if uncertain, even if small, you begin to reclaim the one thing the system could never give you, yourself. There comes a moment, often unannounced, when you stop trying to go back. Back to the schedule, back to the pace, back to the version of yourself who knew exactly what to do each morning. First, you try. You keep busy. You fill your time with small obligations, harmless distractions, books, errands, routines. You tell yourself you're adjusting, but something in you knows, this isn't it. And then, without fanfare, you stop pretending. You stop filling the space. And in that moment, that rare, terrifying silence, something breaks. But something else begins. It's not loud. It's not even visible to anyone else. But inside, a shift is taking place. You begin to withdraw, not out of bitterness, not out of failure, but out of necessity. Carl Jung called this sacred withdrawal, the turning inward that often follows the first half of life, when the ego has done its work and no longer knows what to chase. You're not losing energy. You're redirecting it, away from performance, toward presence, away from proving, toward being. This is not depression, though it can look like it. It's not confusion, though it can feel like it. It's the moment the inner self begins to emerge, quietly, after a lifetime of being buried beneath what was expected. You start noticing strange things. You feel discomfort around old conversations. You lose interest in news cycles, in small talk, in superficial goals. Your soul begins to crave something real. And what's most surprising isn't the loss of ambition. It's the relief. For the first time, you're no longer performing the character you played for decades. You're simply there, breathing, watching, listening. This is the threshold most people avoid because it looks like emptiness. But it's not. It's space, the fertile kind. The kind that can grow a new self, not a reactive self, but a rooted one. Think of the forest in winter. To the untrained eye, it seems lifeless. But underneath the soil, transformation is already happening. Silently, slowly, without demand. This is your inner winter. Not a season of decline, but of integration. The experiences you lived but never processed begin to surface. The grief you postponed returns, not to punish, but to be held. Because true presence doesn't begin when life is loud. It begins in the stillness, in the days when nothing is expected of you, in the mornings when you wake up and realize you no longer need to rush. And though this space may feel unfamiliar, it is sacred. It is yours, and it is not a void. It is the beginning of depth. This is not a crisis. It's a quiet homecoming. And for the first time, you're not arriving as someone's employee. You're not arriving as someone's provider. You are simply arriving as you. At first, the stillness feels like absence. But then, it begins to feel like truth. Without the noise, without the schedules, without the constant need to explain yourself. Something rare begins to happen. You start to see, not the world as they told you it was. Not the version shaped by corporate values, retirement plans, or societal checklists, but life itself, raw, unfiltered, imperfect, and sacred. You notice the way sunlight lands on your table in the morning, the strange beauty of silence between conversations, the way your breath softens when you stop trying to be impressive. And slowly, you realize, you don't miss your old life. You miss the parts of yourself that got buried beneath it. The artist, the wanderer, the one who used to ask questions that made people uncomfortable, the one who used to wonder what else was possible. For years, those parts of you were silenced, not out of malice, but necessity. There were bills to pay, roles to fill, a reputation to maintain. You did what was needed to keep things moving, but in the process, you learned to ignore your own aliveness. Now, in this space beyond the role, those voices return. Quiet at first, but insistent. They don't demand you change everything. They simply invite you to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. This remembering is not nostalgic. It's not about going backward. It's about reclaiming the parts of your soul that were put on hold for too long. And this too is a kind of work. Not the external kind, but inner labor, shadow work, integration, the deep, unseen effort of becoming whole. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." And that chaos, the uncertainty, the stillness, the shedding of old skins, is not failure. It's gestation. You are not lost. You are becoming. And becoming is never clean. It's messy. It's emotional. It's filled with mornings where you feel purposeless, afternoons where doubt creeps in, and evenings where something ancient inside you whispers, keep going. Not toward success, but toward sincerity. Toward a life that feels real when everything else is stripped away. This is your sovereignty, not the kind sold in brochures or promised by financial advisors, but the kind that arises when you choose depth over speed, truth over comfort, and presence over performance. It is the quiet courage to sit in your own company, to walk without a destination, to speak not to impress, but to connect, to slow down without guilt, to wake up without needing to be anything for anyone. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are simply waking up. And now, with nothing to prove, you are finally free to ask, what kind of life do I want to live from here? And who am I when no one is watching but me? There's a moment when the question shifts. It's no longer, who am I without the role? It becomes, what kind of life do I want to live now? Not out of obligation, but out of truth. That shift is subtle but profound, because for the first time in decades, you're not operating from a script. There's no promotion to earn, no image to maintain, no race to win. There's just you, and time, and the quiet permission to begin again. This isn't a second act. It's your first unscripted breath. And with it comes a different kind of responsibility, not to the system, but to the soul, to the child you once were, to the parts of you that waited patiently in the background, hoping one day you'd turn inward and ask, what did I love? What made me feel alive? It might be painting, or gardening, or writing letters you never send. It might be long walks at dusk with no destination. It might be learning to rest without guilt, or waking up without an alarm and letting the morning unfold without pressure. It might even be doing nothing and discovering that nothing is actually everything you were missing. Because the currency of this chapter is not achievement, it's presence. And presence is not passive, it's radical. In a world that trained you to measure your worth by speed, output, and efficiency, choosing to be here, really here, is an act of quiet defiance. You may still hear the echoes of the old world. Shouldn't you be doing something? Shouldn't you stay productive? But now you can answer gently, I am. Because healing is doing. Because silence is doing. Because living without needing to justify your existence, that too is doing. You are no longer a role. You are a person. And that difference changes everything. This isn't the freedom they sold you, the one filled with cruise packages and countdown clocks. This is the kind of freedom that grows in solitude, in slowness, in surrender. It's not loud. It doesn't post updates. It doesn't need approval. But it's real. And it's yours. So no, the journey didn't end with retirement. That was just the shedding of the old skin. The real journey begins when you stop waiting and start listening. And what you hear won't be instructions. It will be invitations to be softer, to be slower, to be more honest with yourself, to create something not for recognition, but for meaning, to live with less noise and more truth, to say no more often, and yes only when it's real, to realize that you don't need to be busy to be alive, that you don't need to be useful to be worthy, that your being is enough now as it is, because in the end, the deepest purpose is not to impress the world, it's to feel at home within yourself. So here you are, at the threshold not of an ending but of a beginning. Not the beginning they promised, the one dressed in brochures and carefully managed portfolios, but a beginning of your own design. No maps, no titles, no applause, just you. And the question that finally matters, what now, if nothing needs to be proven? The world will still try to pull you back, into urgency, into planning, into the illusion that your value is somewhere outside of you. But now you've tasted something else, stillness, silence, and the soft truth that you are allowed to live without explanation. You are allowed to rest without guilt, to choose without justification, to feel joy not as a reward, but as a right. The old structure taught you to delay life, to earn it, to postpone presence in the name of preparation. And now, standing in this open space, you see how much that delay cost you. Not just in time, but in intimacy, with yourself, with life, with the small, sacred details you once overlooked. You remember how deeply satisfying a quiet morning can be, how much meaning lives in a single, honest conversation, how rich life becomes when you're not rushing to the next thing, when the moment itself becomes enough. But regret is not the point of awakening. Presence is, because no matter how long you followed the script, you are here now, aware, awake, capable of choosing differently, not because someone told you to, but because it feels true. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. Not someday, not after retirement, now." And that's what this moment is asking of you. Not to have answers, not to redesign your entire life overnight, but to become honest, to look inward, to ask yourself the questions that still scare you, and listen, really listen, for what arises. You don't need a 5-year plan. You need space, silence, time that is unclaimed so something new can emerge. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're not too late. You're becoming, not into someone new, but into someone whole. So let the world misunderstand your slowness. Let them misinterpret your stillness. That's not your concern anymore. You're no longer living to be understood. You're living to be real. Start small. 10 minutes of silence. A walk without headphones. A conversation without pretending. Let your days be shaped not by urgency, but by meaning. Not by duty, but by depth. You have nothing left to prove, and everything left to feel. If this message resonated with you, write in the comments, "I begin again," not to be seen, but to affirm to yourself that this time you're walking forward without a mask, without the old performance. You're not retiring from life. You're returning to it. And if this conversation stirred something in you, a quiet truth, a deep breath, a long-forgotten part of yourself, you're not alone. Subscribe if you want more silence, more truth, and less noise.